So, hi guys, I'm Lisa Lindsay, the Executive Director of the Private Risk Management Association, and thank you for joining September's Enlightenment session, which will provide a look into real-world cyber exposures and the coverage available to protect against these exposures. What I'd like to do now is turn the call over to Jed Usich from Hartford Steam Boiler, who will kick off today's conversation. Jed?
Lisa, thank you for the introduction. On behalf of all of us at HSB, in particular the HSB Personal Lines team, we're pleased to be part of the PRMA Enlightenment series. For those who might not know, although 150 years old this year, HSB provides cutting-edge specialty personal lines coverages and risk management support to over 80 personal lines companies. We hope this session will provide you with a few good takeaways with respect to the reality of cyber exposures, as well as the emerging insurance elements that are designed to address them. Fundamentally, it's not breaking news that the affluent or wealthy have significant concerns when it comes to cyber-related exposures. Russ Prince reported back in 2007 that 62% of the wealthy are highly concerned about their identity being stolen. Our own HSB Google survey work with over 25,000 respondents, as well as a new Zogby survey we just completed, aligns with this older Russ Prince findings in many ways. First, 42% of those we surveyed would like help with protection from cyber attacks. Second, the largest segment of that 42% was made up of the highest income bracket within the Google survey system. And third, 23% of those hacked spend between $1,000 to $5,000 to simply restore their data. We hear a lot about cyber exposures in the media and news and in a general sense. So to help shed some light and describe really in plain English what cyber exposures really entail, let me turn the floor over to Norm Toms, our HSB resident cyber tech expert, who, by the way, might be considered an ethical hacker. Norm?
Thanks, Jed. Cyber in general has a lot of topics associated with it. And while I'll be broad with my comments, I will tend to focus on the smart home and wireless technology as it has received a lot in the press recently. So how will hackers access you? There's basically two paradigms or methods by which hackers will access or infiltrate your smart home. The first method revolves around traditional social engineering attacks on your PC, your tablet, or your smartphone. Social engineering is basically tricking people into obfuscating the security measures that they put in place on these individual devices. It's not just an email, it's also a phone call. Sometimes you'll receive a phone call asking you for personal information. It's a method by which we use to trick you into giving us information. Another method is just simply dropping a thumb drive in a parking lot. Incidentally, when we did our research years ago, as hackers, we would drop them in office buildings, and we weren't quite getting the response that we wanted. And we realized that dropping them in parking lots, people were more apt to pick up that thumb drive and stick it into their computers than they were the ones that they were finding in an office. As you'll hear later on, these types of social engineering attacks are getting higher and higher click-through rates, and I'll talk about click-through rates in a minute. We want to trick you to clicking or downloading a file, something onto that device, and then we'll exploit the vulnerability in whatever component, laptop, PC, phone that you're using. And quickly, let me just go over what an exploit is versus a vulnerability. A vulnerability is a weakness in software. It's a weakness in the application or the BIOS in hardware. BIOS is the software that will run that hardware. An app is just simply a program that runs on your device, your tablet, your laptop, or your phone. An exploit is when we actually take that vulnerability and we turn it into an actual breach. So the vulnerability is the fact that there's a weakness in the software. The exploit is when we take that weakness and we expose it. An example of that would be you receive an email on your phone. Hey, you won the lottery. When you click this link, they exploit the vulnerability in whatever the device is that you're using, and then they access that device. They own that device. These are traditional hacks that are used to gain access and control your devices. Once they get control of this device, once we own the laptop, the tablet, or the phone, we're then able to jump over and take control of whatever that phone were to control, which could be your smartphone. The main point that I want to get across here is the attack vector is they're coming at the laptop, they're coming at the tablet or the smartphone, and then because that device has access to control the smart home, they in turn now have access to own the smart home. The second method involves accessing the home through those new smart home devices, thermostats, lights, light switches, cameras, door locks, hubs. These are the new components that expose a new attack vector for hackers. People are comfortable with Wi-Fi, they understand its role, and they've been warned for years about its vulnerabilities. And for the most part, they've heeded these warnings. Now we're adding new radio waves and wireless protocols. You'll hear the terms Zigbee, Z-Wave, Bluetooth Low Energy. These are the new protocols that are used, wireless protocols that are used for these smart devices in your house. Right now, people don't recognize this as an exposure. They don't realize what it truly means. There are no virus software packages. There's no malware or intrusion detection packages that are put in place right now to protect these new devices, these new wireless devices. Laptops have virus software. Sometimes your network has intrusion detection on it. These devices don't have that. Ultimately, your smart home devices will run across that home network and allow remote access to the home. Once these devices are compromised, they will move laterally from this device, this light switch or this camera. They'll move laterally over to the data that's in your home. And ultimately, they'll access your PCs, laptops, or smartphones. And I just want to draw that quick distinction between these two methods of attacks or paradigms of attacks. One is going at a traditional laptop or PC through that device, getting access to the home. The other is coming through these new devices and then moving laterally over to the laptop. I just want to touch on something real quick. Radio waves are not confined to the four walls of your house. They emanate well beyond the house. They're transmitted outside of the perimeter of the walls within your house. Hackers often can sit outside and listen for these radio waves, sniff these radio waves, and ultimately get access to that network. The main point here, like I said, is the new exposure of having these new devices in your house. So let's focus on that second paradigm, the devices that create this new exposure, these connected thermostats. One of the most popular items used in smart homes is this smart thermostat, Nest, Ecobee, Honeywell. The major security concern is the ease at which hackers were able to gain entry into these devices. When they were first installed or created, security wasn't at the forefront of the design of these products. One expert hacker hacked a Nest thermostat in a mere 15 seconds. And I think on the surface, you may look at this hacked thermostat as not being a big deal, but what we fail to recognize is that these devices collect information about you, about everybody living in that house. These smart thermostats know when somebody is at home, they learn your schedule, they know when you're awake, and they know when you're asleep. Two very, very valuable pieces of information to hackers and to burglars, to know when you're there and when you're not there. Smart TVs, yet another vulnerability. Smart TVs are certainly a convenient device to have. Hackers gain entry or gain access to that smart TV. You'll be surprised what they can get at. More often than not, on your smart TV, you have some sort of Netflix account. Most people with that Netflix account will use the same email ID and password that they use on their home email. And once hackers get access to the TV, they get access to the Netflix account and the IDs and passwords associated with that personal information. Also, a lot of these TVs, smart TVs, have cameras with them. Cyber attackers can get access to that camera and can spy on you. Again, learning when you're home, learning when you're not home. But more importantly, from a burglary standpoint, they can get a look around your house and see what other valuables are within the house. Due to a lack of general security standards, some hackers can even lock you out of your television entirely. And it's not just your television, it's your appliances. And once they lock you out of that device or that appliance, they'll ask for payment or ransom before they'll give it back to you. So how are they doing this? How are they getting access to these devices? Unencrypted key exchanges or unencrypted communications with cloud services. What I mean by unencrypted is clear text, information that you and I can both read with our eyes. It's not garbled up text. It's clear. It's my ID is XYZ, my password is 123. And if a hacker can get access to the network and he can see the data going across that network and it's unencrypted, it's clear, then they have the IDs and passwords and then able to compromise the device. Another mechanism that isn't often apparent to people is open services or ports or protocols that are left open for technicians to troubleshoot appliances. These are well known amongst us in the hacking community, and they're not often well protected. And if I find that you have XYZ appliance in your home and I recognize that there's an open port for a technician that's unsecured, then that will be the method by which I get in. Home security, again, this needs no real explanation. A lot of smart homes users are hooking up their security systems to the internet to enable control of that home through their smartphone. If I were to gain access to that, I may be able to open and close your garage doors, unlock your doors, look at security cameras. Not necessarily something that we would want. You wouldn't want a hacker or a burglar to know when you're home or away. If they get access to that security system, they would get access to that information. Another not so obvious mechanism is eavesdropping. I think we've all maybe seen in the news or online this new device, this Amazon Echo device. I think it's a wonderful device. I have it in my home. I spent some time out at the Consumer Electronics Show, and while Amazon was not there and the Echo wasn't present, just about every vendor was talking about integration points with this Amazon Echo. I think it's a phenomenal device, but one thing where it falls short is from a security standpoint, and there is no security around your voice. It will listen to your voice and it will respond to your voice. And one quick example that I'll give of this is in my house, one day I came home and I didn't go into the house. I went around to the back of my house and it started to rain and I wanted to get back in the house and I walked up to the sliding glass door and it was locked. And I looked in the door and I saw my Amazon Echo sitting on the kitchen table, and I simply gave it a command to unlock and open my garage doors, and it did. Certainly not a flaw in what Amazon is doing, but necessarily something that people should think about. And it's not just opening doors. I could turn on lights. I could adjust thermostats. I could do anything just simply from using my voice right outside my house. Lighting and electrical. While you may think that it's a nuisance that a hacker gets control of your light switch or a light within your house, hackers are often looking to create what we call botnets, which is really a grouping of computers that we have control of that we can then set off to do a task for us. And if you have multiple light switches in your house, if I'm able to compromise those light switches, then now I have more of a grouping of computers that I can use for denying service against something or hacking into another device. This new attack vector, all of these devices that I just spoke about are our attack vector, and there are many more. The focus here is to recognize that there are many different ways that hackers will get in. Understanding these individual attack vectors is key to defending against yourself. We could spend hours in depth talking about that, but I just wanted to make sure that we had a slide here to show you that it's not simply these devices in your house. There's other attack vectors and mechanisms by which they'll get into your house. So what are they after? They're after anything that they can monetize, anything we can monetize. Credit card information, bank account information, identity information. If they have control of a device, like I said, if they can take control of your TV or take control of your appliance, they'll be looking to sell that access to somebody else. Where do they sell it? We go to the dark web. This is a part of the internet that's used for selling this credit card, bank, and personally identifiable information. The dark web is not accessible in the traditional ways that you and I are used to. You need special browsing software. It's often in encrypted website names. It's not simply going to www.hsb.com. It's a long encrypted name. It's often used for anonymous browsing and a lot of illicit activity, and that's where they go to sell this information. They are selling it using bitcoins. Everything is anonymous. They're using proxies through all different parts of the world to anonymize themselves and to keep themselves away from the authorities. If they have access to your devices, they will move laterally, I can guarantee that, to get at other information. Quicken your home data. They'll deny access to that data. They'll hold it hostage, and they will wait for payment until they'll give you that data back. Holding, like I said before, holding an appliance hostage until payment is made is another mechanism that they'll use. Black Hat and DEF CON. These are two huge, widely attended conferences where hackers get together from all over the world to show off what they can do, how they can do it, and just share information amongst themselves. And I wanted to use this as an opportunity to explain a couple things from this year's Black Hat and DEF CON events that I found extremely interesting. Machine learning tactics. They will use logic to study the data that is out there. They're using machine learning to read your social media footprint. We will read your Twitter accounts using machine learning techniques. We'll read your Instagram and your Facebook. We will learn about you, and we will target you with an incredibly relevant email attack or an incredibly relevant tweet. As we learn what you're interested in, maybe you're a soccer coach, or maybe you're into community activism, or maybe you're researching some health-related issues. As you create a social media footprint, hackers, like I said, will use machine learning tactics to understand you, profile you, and direct a very keen email at you to get that higher click-through rate. As we became more aware of hackers and this social engineering, we started to educate people about that, and we started to see these click-through rates dropping down into the 10 to 12% success rate. As they start to use machine learning tactics to understand your social media profile, we're seeing them as high as 60 to 65% success rates in clicking through. Not only are we using machine learning to profile you from a social media standpoint, we're also using it for defense mechanisms. I spoke earlier about these botnets. These botnets, like I said, are devices that we control, that we can use to launch attacks against someone else. We're using machine learning to identify these botnets and to shut them down as quick as we can. So it's on both sides of the coin. The last thing that I want to talk about, and to me one of the most alarming facts, is early on in hacking, we needed to be close to, from a wireless standpoint, we needed to be close to the physical building or room that we were trying to hack into. That's no longer the case. We're starting to see drones that are being outfitted with laptops and hacking devices where I can be literally miles away from the house or the property that I want to get access to. I can type in the coordinates, I can fly this drone to that house, I can land the drone on the house, and I can sit there for hours, if not days, sniffing the network and looking at what's happening inside the house. To me, that was very, very troublesome to see that.
Norm, thanks for the real talk or translation on a rapidly expanding landscape of cyber vulnerabilities, vectors, and truly real-life situations that we and our clients face. I think a meaningful takeaway is that these are not future state issues or concerns, that they're in the here and now. So that's really important for everyone to realize. And just a quick note, I might remind the listening audience that you can send any questions you might have for Norm via the chat functionality in the webinar facility. Lisa will be monitoring that for any traffic, and we'll answer what we can after our next segment. I'd like to now introduce Tim Zielman, our Vice President for Strategic Products and our person most knowledgeable with respect to the existing industry cyber responses, as well as the architect of our new personal cyber coverages. Tim?
Thanks, Jed. So Norm spent some time walking us through some of these new technologies and new vulnerabilities that we face in our personal lives. I'm just going to take a few minutes and look at this whole thing kind of from an insurance perspective. Look at some of these new vulnerabilities, look at the new kinds of damage that can result from these vulnerabilities, particularly insurable forms of damage, the kinds of insurance responses we might expect from these new damages, new vulnerabilities. So let's start by going back and looking at the anatomy of some of these attacks that Norm talked about. When you think about an attack on a home or a personal device, you really think about at least two components of the attack. One is kind of the vector, the means of attack, the strategy of the tactics that the attacker uses. Is it a targeted hacking event where they pick out an individual target and go after them? Is it some sort of a virus infection, more of an automated, widespread sort of thing potentially? So you can have various methods for the attack, and then you can have hardware that's been targeted. And again, we've gone through this over the last 20 minutes or so, but the kinds of devices that are now potential targets for attack are proliferating dramatically. You've got kind of the traditional computing devices like desktops and laptops, but also all sorts of new things: mobile devices, phones, tablets, connected home devices of all kinds, even cars. And then the third interesting thing to think about is the outcomes of these attacks. Sure, you have these attacks. Criminals have these new methods and new pathways, but what sort of damages ultimately result, and is there an insurance solution for those kinds of damages? When I look at these things, I think broadly about two kinds of potential damage from cyber attacks. And they're broadly kind of real-world damages and ones and zeros, kind of electronic damages. So let's start with the real-world damages. So we went through, and Norm in particular talked about ways in which cyber criminals can get access to a connected home, can get access to various kinds of devices within the connected home, ranging from entertainment systems to connected thermostats to security systems, cameras, all that stuff. So what could a criminal potentially do with that sort of access? Well, some of the things they could do can result in fairly traditional, well-understood kinds of damage. For example, think about burglary. So, in today's world, or the world of 10 or 20 years ago, burglary was done the good old-fashioned way. Doors were kicked in, windows were broken, and access was gained that way. In today's world, you can hack into a home security system. You can unlock doors remotely and electronically and gain access to a house that way. You can case a house by hacking into a camera system connected to an entertainment system, connected to a security system, and check things out that way. But in the end, you still have a burglary, and you still have potentially coverage for that kind of burglary under the same sorts of traditional homeowners coverage that would cover a burglary today. So potentially new ways of doing things, maybe expanded damage, different kinds of frequencies for these kinds of events going forward, but still coverage under relatively traditional insurance coverages. A similar sort of thing falls in the same category of real-world damage that results from a cyber attack. You can think of, say, vandalism, for example, as a result of someone hacking into a connected thermostat. There's the potential to hack into a connected thermostat, say turn off the heat during the winter, cause pipes to break, and have a flooding loss as a result of that. Again, the initiation of this is all kind of high-tech hacking, but the result of it would be the same as, say, a power outage that turned off the heat. You have a traditional kind of loss, again, likely picked up by more traditional forms of insurance. That brings us to kind of the second category of insurance, of damage rather, and that's more kind of high-tech, ones and zeros kinds of damage. So other kinds of damage that can result from attacks on home networks and personal computing devices, things like damage to data, damage to software, damage to operating systems. These are all things that are important, they're costly, and can be critical for a homeowner if they lose financial information, tax information, pictures, all kinds of private data that people store on their own devices. And there is, for the most part, no coverage for that sort of loss under traditional insurance policies. A lot of these things would take, they're going to take IT work to recover from, data needs to be recovered, systems need to be reconfigured, and viruses and other malicious code needs to be removed. It's a new area where there currently is no coverage, and is, I think, an opportunity for insurers to respond with coverage to kind of cover this new and emerging exposure and kind of damage that can result from some of these new vulnerabilities. Another way some of these new threats and new vulnerabilities can play out from an insurance perspective is through cyber extortion. And this is, again, a topic that Norm covered when he talked about some of the technical aspects of the connected home and vulnerabilities in personal devices coming in the first half of this webinar. When I think of an extortion event, I think of it broadly as encompassing two components. An extortion event includes some sort of threat combined with demand for money. In somewhat traditional extortion scenarios, there's a particular sequence of those events. You have a threat first, and if the threat is not, if the threat first, and the threat is to do some damage if money is not paid. So there's a threat first, and then potentially damage to follow, an attack of some kind to follow if the demand for money is not met. With the newer kind of ransomware type extortion, you have a different sequence of those events. You may have an attack first, where the cyber criminal gets access to an insured system, is able to get in and do the damage, encrypt data, for example, and then the demand is made after the attack takes place. Essentially, the demand is pay up, and we'll give you a key that will let you undo the damage that was done. So different kinds of sequences of events, all leading to kind of an extortion scenario where a threat is made in connection with the demand for money. We also look at extortion from the perspective of kinds of extortion and kind of the ways that cyber criminals carry out extortion events and collect money from them. The two kind of ways we think of extortion are targeted extortion and automated extortion. So with targeted extortion, the cyber criminal is identifying a particular victim and tailoring a specific attack and a specific demand to that particular target. Something we see more often in the commercial world, obviously less likely in the personal world, but certainly not inconceivable. In the right circumstances, it might make sense for a cyber criminal to particularly target an individual person. As you can imagine, demands for money in this sort of targeted extortion tend to be higher too. It's a higher effort on the part of the cyber criminal, but also the demands for money tend to be higher. Automated extortion or ransomware, on the other hand, is kind of a different business model from the cyber criminal's point of view. It is kind of a low effort situation from the cyber criminal's point of view. They will either build or, in today's world, more likely buy a piece of software, malware, that will essentially troll the internet looking for vulnerable systems. And then once it finds a vulnerable system, will go in, find and encrypt information, and then demand money and essentially just send revenue back to the cyber criminal who's masterminding this whole thing. Very low effort by the cyber criminal on a case-by-case basis, but the demands also tend to be relatively low, and that's kind of the way it works. It's a relatively low frequency, high frequency rather, low severity sort of play. And in any case, both sort of new scenarios, as far as insurance is concerned, there is no traditional kind of insurance solution to this kind of extortion. So it's kind of yet another component of this expanding risk for homeowners that is an opportunity for new coverage because no coverage currently exists in coverage for this sort of an event. The next thing I want to talk about is data breach. And data breach is probably a familiar concept to people in the commercial world. Everybody's familiar with some of the larger commercial data breaches we've seen over the last couple of years, your Targets and Home Depots, Anthems, and so on. And I think people are kind of aware of the components of those situations. The entity that is the victim of the breach is often a commercial entity that holds large amounts of personal information, employee information, payment information related to its customers, and it's responsible for that information. And in these events, a cyber criminal is able to somehow get access to that information and steal it. And not only that, but there's a strong regulatory component to this. So once this information has been stolen, there are laws in those states that require the entity that was responsible for that information to notify the individuals who were affected, and sometimes to provide them certain kinds of services, credit monitoring and other things. If you look at this from a personal perspective, from kind of a homeowner's perspective, the same kind of scenario can play out from a personal perspective. There are, in your individual capacity, you may have information, private information about other people in your possession. You may be involved in a volunteer organization and have personal information that relates to other people in connection with that volunteer work that you do. You may manage the financial affairs of a friend or a relative or a neighbor and have personal information about that person in connection with those activities. If any of those things are true and you have that kind of personal information and it's lost or stolen, you may have the same sorts of legal obligations that a commercial entity would have in a situation like that. Not all state laws are written that broadly, but certainly some of them are. Some of them are written broadly enough to cover individual people in situations like that, in the same way that commercial entities are covered as well. So just another, sort of kind of new personal exposure in this cyber realm for which there's essentially no coverage currently. One final thing I want to take a look at is online fraud. And this, really plays into the sort of social engineering that Norm was talking about in the first half of the webinar. The idea here is that some bad guy is going to try to come in and deceive you into voluntarily parting with a sum of money. And they do this in a very clever way, and they do this really taking advantage of all the kinds of information that are currently out there about you. Social media to begin with, and even other forms of data that they can get access to. And people can really, it's kind of shocking, people can really learn quite a bit about you. And smart cyber fraudsters take advantage of that vast treasure trove of information to craft a deception that you will be particularly vulnerable to. One kind of example of this that's fairly common is something called the grandparent scam, where cyber criminals will identify someone who has grandchildren who are either off at college, traveling abroad, or something like that. And then they will send an email to the victim saying, essentially impersonating that grandchild and saying, I've been in a car accident, I've been arrested, I've been in some other kind of an accident, gotten into some kind of trouble, and I need money immediately. I need to pay bail, I need to pay a lawyer, I need to settle something with someone else in order to get myself out of trouble, and I need money immediately. And what's more, I can't call my parents. They'd be so upset. I really don't want to bother them with that, so I'm calling you because I can trust you, and please, wire the money or send a Western Union wire immediately. And this sort of thing, particularly if well crafted with lots of individual details in there, is surprisingly effective. And there are all sorts of scams that are like that are really possible because of the vast amounts of information that is out there in today's world. Again, another kind of emerging sort of cyber exposure that the insurance industry has yet to respond to, but is a potentially fruitful area for insurance coverage. And then kind of the last thing on the list is identity theft. And this is a little bit different from the other kinds of exposures that I've talked about, because I think it's more well known and more well understood in the insurance arena. Identity theft is an exposure that has existed for quite a while. An insurance response for identity theft has also existed for quite a while. HSB itself has been a writer of identity theft coverage on our own and through the companies that we support and reinsure for more than 10 years. But it's also an important thing, even though it's a little different from the other cyber exposures, it's an important thing to raise in this context because the vectors for identity theft are expanding as we go on. A lot of what Norm talked about in the first part of this presentation were ways for cyber criminals to get more and more access to information about us, either by getting into our home networks or phones or other devices and getting lots of personal details, an enormous amount of personal information about who we are, what we like to do, where we bank, how much money we have, what our jobs are, when we're awake, when we're asleep, when we're on vacation, when we're at home. And all that kind of information can be used by cyber criminals for, among other things, identity theft. To take a step back, when we're talking about identity theft, we're talking about a situation where a bad guy will use information about someone to effectively impersonate that person. And they do that often to commit financial fraud, to open bank accounts, to take out loans in that person's name. And then ultimately, when the victim becomes aware of this, there's a fairly long and arduous process of recovering one's identity, recovering control over one's identity. And this is although been a well-publicized peril in recent years, it is something that can only expand with the more connected world we live in and the absolute explosion of personal data that's available out there to cyber criminals. I just want to kind of finish my little part of this presentation with just kind of a little summary of insurance responses that exist or may exist in the future to these kinds of perils. We finished by talking about identity theft exposures, and as I mentioned, this is already a fairly well understood and well covered peril in the insurance industry. Another kind of insurance response that we've mentioned briefly is existing coverage for somewhat new perils, burglary that's conducted by hacking into a home security system, or water and flooding damage that's caused by hacking into a connected thermostat, that sort of thing. And then there's really this broad third category, emerging exposures, things like cyber fraud, extortion, damage to data and software as the result of a computer attack, that are really kind of new sorts of exposures that are just emerging now or have emerged within the last couple of years, and really are begging for an insurance response to them kind of in today's vacuum in this sort of area. And I think there are carriers that are out there working on this right now. HSB is certainly one of them. We are we've developed a homeowner cyber process, and we're in the process of working with the companies that we support and reinsure to offer this kind of a coverage and get it out in the marketplace. And you should start to see that sort of thing sometime next year as we implement this coverage with some of our partners. But I just want to leave people with the thought that these are important exposures, developing exposures that affect high-end homeowners in particular, but homeowners generally. And coverage for these risks is something that the marketplace is really going to expect more and more as we go forward, and will be critical to round out a complete package of insurance coverage.
Excellent. Thanks, Tim. Thanks again, Norm. That really concludes our prepared remarks on this real-world personal cyber exposure and some of the coverages on the horizon that you, as a comprehensive risk advisor, will be able to provide to your clients. At this time, I'll turn things back over to Lisa Lindsay, who will hopefully have a few questions from the audience that we might address. And I would add that while I know this is not a shy group in general, but should you have future questions on this topic, please do feel free to contact me at any time. And thanks for joining and thanks for listening. Lisa?
Great, thanks, Jed. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Norm and Tim as well. So we do have some questions here, which I will get to in a moment. But one of the things that strikes me as we sit here and we talk about all of these quickly changing things that are occurring out there. So technology advances that are meant to make our lives easier, make things more convenient for all of us to do, whether it's changing the heating remotely from your home or keyless entry and all those things. They certainly make life easy on one hand, but present us with some very unique risk exposures that, to the point that was made here today, don't necessarily have a corresponding traditional insurance solution in place where somebody can choose to buy coverage and be protected for all of the things that are going on out there. And I think it really just continues to raise the awareness that as personal risk advisors, we really have to be well-versed in helping our clients manage risk, not only with the traditional insurance solutions, but with other means, other risk mitigation things, whether it's through education and really just understanding some of the risks associated with activities, and then, how do you make sure you have a secure network and all of those things. But really kind of crazy stuff going. It makes me think that the smart home, in some ways, maybe isn't all that smart right now. So thank you guys for that. A couple of questions that have come in. So let me go ahead and start with a really simple one, I think, for you guys, and something that most of us probably deal with on a daily basis. Have you seen unsubscribe links be used to trick people into providing information that allows them to gain access?
This is Norman speaking. Absolutely yes. I have never and will never click on an unsubscribe link that is unsolicited to me. If I know that I subscribed to Home Depot's mailing list and then I want to get off of that mailing list, something that I knowingly did, then I would go in and I would feel comfortable clicking on an unsubscribe link from Home Depot. But oftentimes when spam comes to me and there's a link at the bottom that says, hey, if you don't want this email or this being sent to you, then click here. Oftentimes than not, that is a mechanism by which hackers are using to get at you, to get at your profile. And I will never click on those.
So the alternative then is to just simply continue to get those emails and delete them?
Well, the alternative is to get into whatever mail program you're using and filter that sender out. And oftentimes the domains that they're coming from is a clear indicator that it's not from the source that they say they are. Sometimes the email will come in and it will be something to do with rabbits, we'll say, and then when you look at the domain, it's like ABC, XYZ, something like that, and you really need to go in and just set a filter in your email program to automatically move that to spam. The other thing that I would recommend is that you don't allow your email program to download images automatically, images inside of email messages. Oftentimes those images have code embedded in them that allow the hackers to see who's downloaded it and what the ID associated or email address associated with the individual who downloaded that or opened that email. So you don't even have to click on the link. Just the simple fact that the image has been loaded into your mail program is enough to give them the information that they need, which is the fact that there's a live email address there. And hopefully I made some sense there. And if I didn't, you can follow on.
No, that was good. That was really very helpful. Another question that comes in from our audience: can you explain how a gaming system is hacked and what the intentions of doing so is?
Well, there's quite a few ways. I mean, we could spend hours talking about how they could get into that device. But if you think about it, that gaming device is on your home network. It's speaking on your home network. It's communicating on your home network, and oftentimes it's reaching out to the cloud. Just having a device that I can control that's on your network is extremely valuable to me as a hacker, because now if I can control that device and I can put code onto that device that then allows me to hop over to the laptop or the personal computer or the other devices on your network, that then gives me an eye or a mechanism by which I can get into your house. And often the way that hackers are getting at these devices, and I'll tell you, the Xbox and PlayStation, they're not the easiest devices to hack remotely, but the way that they're getting into these devices is often getting you to download a software package onto that device. And usually when you want to install a package onto a device like that, you have to go to the store associated with the device, the Xbox store or the PlayStation store. But as a developer, sometimes we develop software and we don't want to get it signed, if you would, from Xbox or from PlayStation. So we will send a message to an unsuspecting user telling them, hey, I've got this great game that I'm developing, would you like to download it and try it out, and turn off this feature of your Xbox or PlayStation or whatever gaming device you have that doesn't allow unsigned software to be downloaded onto it. And then you're giving them a small game, but you're also gaining access to the device. Does that help explain?
All right, thank you. Yeah, that's good, and that actually leads into the next question that we have here from the audience. So are there extra security measures that can be taken to mitigate the hacker risk? And let's use the smart home as an example. So are there any extra security measures that can be taken to mitigate the hacker risk on the smart home?
Yeah, there's a few. The first one that I always recommend to people is to change the default IDs and passwords that are associated with the products that you're installing in your house. As hackers, we know these default IDs and passwords, and oftentimes, just out of convenience, people don't want to have to deal with remembering a new ID and password, and they say, I'm just going to use the default that came with the device, and it just makes it that much easier for us to get into the device. The other thing that I strongly recommend from a smart home perspective is if the device doesn't need to talk to the outside world, if it doesn't need to reach out to the world for any reason, then don't allow it to do that, and get into your firewall or your router or whatever networking component you're using for security, and don't allow that device to do that, because once it reaches out to the world, now it's a known device, and we know it's in the house. So I would also ask and recommend that you try to segregate the network that you have your data on, i.e. your laptops and personal computers. Separate that network from the network that your smart home is running on. And I know that this may sound a little bit complicated to you, and whoever you're using for your networking, they should certainly understand the topic that I'm talking about here. But you really want to separate those two networks so that if I am able to compromise a device, a smart home device, it's not on the same network that your laptop or your computers are on, and it makes it infinitely harder for the hackers to be able to jump across those two disparate networks. And I hope that helps.
Excellent.
And there's a lot of other recommendations, but those are the ones that quickly come to mind.
That's really, really, really helpful. So continuing on to talk here, and more great questions coming in from the audience. Any comments on using wireless Bluetooth computer keyboards, mouse, printers, risks associated with the ease of working in that spectrum?
Yeah, my experience has been that using those types of devices in your home isn't quite as bad as when you step out into a coffee shop. A Bluetooth keyboard in a coffee shop is easy prey for a hacker if he happens to be in that coffee shop or that library. Keyboards are trusted devices, and what I mean by a trusted device is that there isn't a lot of authentication that goes on when you attach a keyboard to a computer. So the computer just inherently trusts whatever that keyboard tells it to do. So if I can get a keyboard added somehow, either physically plugged into your computer or wirelessly into your computer, now that computer will trust whatever comes from that device, and we can script thousands and thousands of commands within seconds to make a computer do something.
Thank you. That's helpful, and I think that sometimes as we're busy people traveling, whether it's in an airport lounge, whether it's in a coffee shop, and all of those things, I'm certain that we can all be a little bit more conscious of our activities than we are. Here's a question.
Or one more.
Yep.
Just when you say airport, this is another piece of advice that I give to a lot of people. If you've ever connected to an open wireless network, and you have that profile either stored on your computer, your tablet, or your phone, I highly recommend that you delete that profile. Hackers are known to set up rogue access points that will simulate that of a free wireless network, a Starbucks network, an airport network, and your phone is actively looking and probing for these networks. And if you unknowingly connect to one of those networks, then now you're now on a network that is owned by a hacker. So I will, if I ever do connect to an open network, I'll do it over a VPN. But I am very careful about deleting those profiles from my phone.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent advice. Let's switch gears for just a minute and talk about ransomware. You guys talked about that situation where somebody holds your device or something hostage until you make some type of a payment. And you mentioned, I think, high frequency, low demand. And I've certainly heard of some of our high net worth clients being faced with oh my God, I need to make a payment because I actually need access to my PC. So do you have any advice on what we would say to a client that's been faced with that? Because the notion of actually making some type of a payment to somebody seems a little bit scary, and it might lead me to believe that that's just another way that they're getting access to more of my information.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's definitely not an easy choice to be faced with. There are, a couple different ways. Malwares or ransomware is not all the same. There are different ways that cyber criminals can ask for payment. Oftentimes, they do it through some anonymous means like Bitcoin, and Bitcoin can be a little bit tricky to navigate even if you do want to pay. Some of the better ransomware programs actually will provide you with a significant amount of support and direction and how to do that, which is kind of interesting, but obviously kind of to their benefit to make sure that actually gets done. Others will actually ask for credit card information or something more traditional. And there are pluses and minuses to each one of them. Obviously, with Bitcoin, it's anonymous a little bit for both both parties to the transaction, which can be helpful. Obviously, it's good for the cyber criminals because it reduces the chance of them getting caught because the transaction is anonymous. And again, even from the victim standpoint, it's kind of a one-time thing. So you don't have the danger of the cyber criminal having your credit card, for example. I'd be very reluctant to pay a ransom demand with a credit card that I intended to keep. The other sort of questions that come up in the event of ransomware is whether paying once will increase the likelihood that you're going to get extorted again in the future, which I think is a very legitimate question. There have been some studies done of that have indicated that paying once does not actually increase your frequency, but I think things are still inconclusive. And despite those study results, there's still some logic that kind of tells you that maybe you would be put on a suckers list if you paid. So I think at the bottom line, there's no easy answer. It's difficult to say yes, you should always pay, or no, you should never pay. Even law enforcement, even the FBI, I believe, has said that in some circumstances it probably makes sense to pay. So it's a difficult question, but certainly it's something where you need to get all the information you possibly can about the individual threat that you're facing, and be very careful about the actions that you take.
Thanks. And are there firms, are there experts? Do you know of any vendors that are out there that a client could consult with to help them come to a decision on which way they would go?
Certainly, HSB, as an insurer that's active in this space, we work with firms, and this homeowners coverage that we developed includes some service components, specifically service for people that are in an extortion situation like this, to give them some advice about the situation they're in and what they should do. Unfortunately, I think at this time it's probably difficult for individual homeowners to access that kind of expertise on their own.
All right, thank you. So ever evolving, and certainly look to the marketplace to continue to respond with offerings and whatnot. We're coming up on the hour, but I want to talk for just a couple of minutes about drones. Certainly drones, we hear news about drones on a pretty regular basis. We think about drones. One, there's the recreational aspect, and I know from a risk management standpoint, we think it'd be kind of cool if a drone could come do a roof inspection and help survey the damage post-claim, or even go and do an inspection pre-claim. So there's a lot of really good things about that. But in the presentation today, you guys talked a little bit about this notion of somebody attaching a laptop or some other device to a drone. And if I heard you correctly, you were mentioning that, maybe the bad guys no longer having to be on your street or actually near your property to start to investigate the vulnerabilities of your home network, if you will. But maybe they're several miles away. Can they even be across the country? Like where can these bad guys be located who might be using drone technology to to hack into our clients?
The specific case that I was talking about was using just a regular drone that you could buy, as a consumer device. It wasn't a professional military-grade drone. It was just a consumer-based drone, and we've seen this for years in the hacking community, where they've taken drones, they've attached devices to them, and then they've flown the drones to a location, and then been able to sniff the traffic at that location. What I was referring to also was at DEF CON and at Black Hat, those conferences where they had actually designed the drone around the laptop or the hacking device that they were using. But to answer your question specifically, typically it's related to the battery life inside of that drone. Today's drones, the battery life is between 15 to 20 minutes, and I can travel upwards to 2 miles away with that drone. And by law, the FAA regulates that I fly at line of sight, but if I'm a hacker, I don't necessarily have to do that. Most, if not all, of these drones are outfitted with a camera, and it's really a very simple device with a cell phone attached to it. I can fly it upwards to 1 mile away. I don't even have to use the remote control. I can enter the coordinates, I can give it altitude and speed information and tell it exactly where to go. It will land, it will leave the payload, it will fly right back to me. And I don't even have to have that payload. I don't even have to go back and get that payload. It's usually something that I can just throw away if I had to. But 1 mile to 2 miles, about 15 to 20 minutes of flight time.
Wow, so that does certainly introduce a whole new dimension to what's going on there, and the risks that our clients are facing now and will continue to face as technology evolves. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. So with that, we're just about at the top of the hour. I want to thank Jed and Norm and Tim for sharing their expertise with us today and their insights. I want to thank the audience for participating in today's session, and I want to thank you for putting up some good questions that help all of us be smarter about what's going on there. And with that, let me just turn it over to Jed for any final comments.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks for those that participated. And again, I'd encourage any additional comments or questions as they might arise at any time. My email's on the screen, and I'm a PRMA member, so you can get my information there if need be, or LinkedIn or Twitter. So I hope everyone has a couple takeaways about this personal cyber exposure and up and coming coverages. So thanks again, Lisa, for having us.
All right, thanks guys, and appreciate your continued innovation in this space, and have a good rest of the week, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.